Welcome to you all. Our What's New in Business Central session. Well, it's not a normal one, but Arend-Jan Kauffmann and Waldo, Eric Wauters have been very willing to do this. It was originally planned as a Dutch Dynamics community session in March, but as of the Corona situation, we had to cancel that one, and they offered to do it as a Areopa webinar. Apparently, a lot of you have picked up this. We have a lot of attendees today, so welcome to you all. Good afternoon in Europe, good morning probably somewhere on the American continent, and I don't know, haven't seen or recognized people but from Asia, Australia, good evening, good night. Welcome. Today will be a very loaded session with a lot of topics, small topics to be discussed. Of course, probably all of you knowing Arend-Jan and Eric, they can do the job very well. Let me start with the normal things. For those who haven't attended any of our webinars yet, these are our housekeeping rules. Your microphone is muted. However, you're very welcome to post your questions in the GoToWebinar question window. I'm the moderator, I'll pick it up. If it's simple to answer, I will do that, but of course, relating to the topic, it's probably more Arend-Jan and Eric to pick that up, and I will hand the question over to them. So be welcome to do that. Let's see with this number of attendees if we get it overloaded or not. I will pose the questions halfway where Eric will stop his part, and Arend-Jan will take over. And at the end, of course, when Arend-Jan has finished, we'll have the remaining questions. It will be a 1 hour as normal, so let's see if we can pack it in. If your colleagues or yourself, you want to go back to the recording, we are recording this, so you can find it on our channel on YouTube. This is the URL, and we have already a nice group of videos. If you want to be in the know, normally informed on what is going to happen, feel free to use this URL. It's not too big. You can always find it on the YouTube recording back, watch it again and use it. Feel welcome to a list to that. For the moment, we have 2 next webinars set up. On the April 28th, the next upcoming one is, and on May 26th, there will be one in between, but we're still working on the topic. And that's bringing me almost to my end, the introduction. We're continuously looking for speakers and topics. If you have a topic, if you would want to be a speaker with an interesting topic, and interesting is relative, there's a lot of things that might be of interest to others. Feel welcome to let me know. And before I'm going to hand off to Eric, thanks to our sponsor once again, making this possible. For enough, as you can see. So I'm going to give my seat to Eric. So Eric, here you go.
Okay, thank you, Luc. Okay, perfect. So let's continue. So you can, I heard you call me Eric, but actually I'm Waldo, so I hope you got the right one on this session now. In any case, what we will cover, and me and AJ is actually on this list. So do not lose too much time. And you obviously see that we have a technical focus on what is new in V16 now, and that is, I don't know how this was announced, but that is actually the intention of this workshop, to have a technically focused list of topics, what is new in this new version of Business Central. What I will cover is this part. So I will go a little bit more into the languages, interfaces, the camera location stuff, events, obsolete, and so on. And after that, AJ will take over and give you some mesmerizing demos on his topics. Okay, let's not waste too much time and go into the first topic. About multiple languages. It was announced as multiple languages, but what does it mean? Well, first of all, the supported languages has been a little bit grown. You can have an overview of all supported languages in this site, and you see that it's already quite a list. And by the way, more are coming. But more important is actually the fact that from this version, languages are apps now. So what does that mean? Well, if you would like to install a language, you're gonna have to install an app. And these apps are available on the DVD, are available on Docker, and obviously in Business Central SaaS, they are available in App Source. I cannot use this, but if you just use in Business Central SaaS and you would like to install the Dutch language, you can basically just search for it, and here in the bottom, you can see that there are some Dutch languages available on App Source, and we all know, obviously, that the real Dutch language is Flemish. So let's look at that, and you see we have now languages as being part of apps. But as a developer, what does that mean? Well, it actually means that you can now create language apps yourself. And basically, a language. Why would that be interesting? Yeah. Well, then you can translate other apps, obviously, or you can let partners translate your app. Right? There is though a limitation. I've been playing with this, and you know, and you might know that I'm quite a big fan of dependencies and implementing dependent apps. To give you one small example, somewhere on my PC, let me see here. This is actually a collection of apps, and all these apps kind of like belong to each other. So it would be nice in this case, for instance, to have like a one language app, like the French language for all my apps. Now that is kind of like in this perspective a little bit less possible. I do think I have an example on how to create such a language app. This is actually kind of like the most simple thing to do. Let me see this app. You see, this is an example of a language app where you basically have just XLF files. You see no AL files whatsoever, but an app.json obviously, and this compiles into an app that basically just installs a language, and you obviously recognize these language files. So as I said, what is not possible is to have multiple files for one language. So in dependency scenarios, you're gonna have to merge these files into one file. I tried that. This is actually an example of a merged language file of multiple apps. It does work. I can now basically just install the language Dutch and French for my app. If that makes sense for you, I think it makes a lot of sense. It may even make more sense, I think, that maybe in a later point we will be able to have multiple language files for one language in one app. Some hearsays in case of languages. Do know if you have an app source app, you don't really have to provide all languages for all countries anymore, but what you do need to do is you need to allow it to be translated. So that's kind of like let someone else solve your language issue. And something else I heard, now these are hearsay, so don't take my word for it, but it should work like this, like if you have foreseen like the Dutch or let's say the German language, the EDE, and the customer requests the DEAT, but obviously it's not there, then the application will revert back to the main language. Okay, maybe a few words on interfaces. I have read community of posts on the community and stuff like that, and there are apparently a lot of developers that expect a lot from this new object type. And I think that is, yeah, all I can say is I expect a lot from this as well. And Having dived into this, I realized that I wanted this like 1 year earlier when we started to redevelop our apps. But in any case, this is actually a very interesting new feature. And I'm going to dive into this a little bit, obviously not deep because we have a lot of the topics and other topics to cover, but I just noticed that there is an Areopa webinar on interfaces, and Tobias Venster will be diving into this deeply. In any case, what does it mean? Well, what is an interface object? Simply said, syntactical contract that can be implemented by a non-abstract method. Clear, isn't it? Well, let's try to give it another description. It is used to define which capabilities must be available for an object while allowing actual implementations to differ. Now, if you remember the facade pattern, there's actually a pattern that has been published years ago when design patterns actually was very active still in the Business Central back then in the Dynamics NAV community. This is actually a new implementation or a decent implementation of that pattern, of the facade pattern. And yeah, there was a good read on that. Tobias Venster, who will be doing the webinar for Areopa, already created a blog post about it that kind of like very well described on how to implement interfaces. This is actually the best documentation that I have found online, including Microsoft's, to getting started with interfaces. So I definitely would recommend you to read that blog post. And it will give you an example on how to implement some kind of interface, in this case on sports evaluation. Now, this is maybe a little bit less practical in terms of Business Central and what we do in Business Central. So what I try to do is create yet another example that actually solves a specific scenario that I already had implemented years ago at the customers. And that is actually an example on how to get a weight from a scale. So if you have a scale and you want Business Central to get a weight from it, something like that. Now, obviously, you can already imagine there are different scales, there are different manufacturers, and probably different interfaces and different ways to do that. So, in a way, it would be interesting to create some kind of interface, and not depending on any kind of manufacturer of a scale. I just want to be able to extend on that. If I would implement my app at the customer with different kinds of scales, I still need to be able to implement the access to the scale to get the weight and to tar the scale correctly. And in some cases, some scales that might be .NET interoperability, who knows? In other cases, that might be some kind of microservices or web service or whatever. Doesn't really matter. The interface is going to help me on defining what methods that I want to have to implement, what I'm depending on in my business logic. So in this case, I would depend on a get weight, on the ability to tar, and some get information about the scale. But that's it, right? And after that, you are able to implement the different business logic. So you see, it's completely like a full bar business logic, completely useless, but you kind of like get the picture. So the get weight, obviously, this is just a random number it will give me, but yeah, this could be like getting to some kind of JavaScript controller then, or whatever you would like to implement on how to get something from the scale, maybe a web service call or whatever. Just doesn't really matter. Now, this is actually the implementation, the code unit that implements some kind of interface. You see here that it implements a certain interface, and there the compiler will make sure that you actually implement it. So I'm actually requested to implement the get weight this way with the same signatures. Yeah. On top of that, I can use an enum to implement the connection from a certain value to a certain implementation code unit. So you see here, I created an enum that implements, again, that interface, where I define the implementation of the iScale interface to a certain code unit, the TFL code unit and the full code unit. And then in code, I basically can figure out some kind of business logic. In my case, the business logic is some kind of setup table. And in that setup table, I have set up the enum value. And I will assign that enum value to my interface, which I defined here as a variable. So I can use that interface variable to get the weight. And because of the enum implementation, I basically just I'm executing the right procedure of the right code unit to get the weight. All right, so what does it mean in practice? Let me try to show you that in code. Now, I was talking about the old way, that facade pattern, and maybe let me show you that facade pattern on how we set that up. Actually, the result is the same. I basically decoupled the function from the actual implementation, but it's obviously we didn't have an interface object, so it needed to be implemented a little bit different. So this is that setup, and you see here that enum that I was talking about. Yeah, but in the old way of doing that, I could have done maybe some kind of code units. So in this case, you see here 3 code units that has an implementation of a certain brand of scales. Yeah, and you already see here that a dependent app can obviously implement yet another code unit that implements that same kind of way. Now, to be able to facilitate this in code units without an interface object, we needed to do something else. So what you'll see it right away when I show you one of the implementation code units. So what we usually work with is some kind of argument table. That argument table has a command, and that is kind of like the method that I would like to implement. So in this case, this code unit implements 2 methods, and just going to run certain method and communicate through that argument table again to a return value. So in this case, the information and the weight, for instance. Yeah. And now in my method, all I could do is get some kind of code unit ID from my setup, right? And then run that code unit with the arguments and get back the weight in this case to save the weight. Yeah. So that was kind of like the old implementation with the facade pattern. In the new way of working, it is just so much easier. The only thing that I need to do is define the contract, meaning these are my commands, remember the commands, and then just implement that contract, right? And in the same way, when I would create a dependent app, what I could do, and this is actually my dependent app, let's just say I would like to create yet another implementation of another brand of scales. I can simply create that enum extension. So I extend the enum with just one new brand, right? And create that code unit like this one that implements the same iScale. Now just imagine that I do not have anything here yet. You will see that the compiler will help me to implement that interface, and it will just prepare those functions for me that I need to implement for this code unit to comply with the contract of that interface. Yeah, and that kind of like is an introduction on interfaces. Let's continue. Camera location. So it has been big news. For now, we will be able to access the camera and the GPS, whatever hardware that we have in our devices, from the browser. And I can tell you that it works. So I can basically just show you very simply from the default implementation for instance, this customer picture here. You will have here a take, and you see this is actually just Chrome. And I will take a new picture, and with that, I'm here. Let's me just remove myself, because that is absolutely not a good picture. But yeah, it does work. Nice, but I have been playing with it again, and I must say it doesn't work always. I have problems making it work on my Docker container. Why that is, I have no idea. I mean, it's the same hardware, just it's the same version of Business Central. And the other thing that I'm not really happy with is the documentation at this point. So if you see here, the documentation on Microsoft Docs gives you an example. But this example is actually not the example that I would like. You see here a lot of .NET interoperability, and as you probably know, .NET interoperability is not available for you creating apps for SaaS. So this code would not work on SaaS. This would only work on-prem. Plus, I noticed that the system app actually does have an implementation of the camera and media interaction. But that does that mean that actually what you probably will have is some kind of public object, and yes, it's even described here on the GitHub part of the system application. So yes, you have a camera object that you can use to simply implement that camera ability for your SaaS projects. This made me wonder, do I have the same for the location to access my GPS? And I personally could not find that. So yes, there is now an ability for you to access the GPS from the browser, and it probably will work, but I cannot get that to work for a SaaS app. Yeah, for the per-tenant extension or any kind of app source app. If you look at the documentation again, you see the .NET interoperability way for getting to the, where is that? The location. So this is actually the request that you want to do. But again, this will use .NET object, and again, for what I know, and I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, that does not work for any kind of cloud app. So I do hope that at some point we will have the same as what we have with camera, a location object that we can just use in the cloud. Next, look up events and insert event subscribers in code. This is actually an ability that has been added to VS Code for easily find events. Now, you didn't see it, but I was actually drawing double quotes while I said easily, because it's, I will just show you. So the shortcut is Alt-Shift-E or find event. You see, Shift-Alt-E. And it will show you every single event that is available in your app. In your apps, actually, if you have a multi-root workspace, this will be all your apps events, and in whatever you depend on. Yeah, so in my case now, Business Central based application. And then you can start to search, for instance, on after post, and you can see which on after posts you have. Or another search you could do is sales post. And then you see, let me do code unit sales, code unit sales post. And then you can see basically all the events from the code unit sales post. This is the new thing, right? And personally, I think it's a really good addition. I have been using it and actually have been using it successfully. So if you have, let's say a code unit, and obviously Alt-Shift-E on after post, let's say, and you will use this one. It is going to add the code already. It's going to subscribe decently. And what many people will like is it adds the parameters there as well. Personally, I find this bad practice. I like it to be this way and also to be a local function. Why? Because if you do not need a parameter, you should not assign it in an event.
So,
okay.
Eric, well, may I ask you a question about this?
Yes, this is totally surprised.
Oh man, you know, that after post event, how do you know that that is the right event, the event you're looking for? I see so many events in that drop down.
Absolutely, that's a very good question. And for that, I have a next slide. There are other ways to get to events. What I have been using quite extensively is that event recorder. But probably what you probably have noticed is when you, for instance, record a piece of business logic, let's say posting a document, then you get about 2,000 events, right? So that is still quite difficult. So what I've been using, like a set of things. First of all, this Alt-Shift-E kind of thing it's pretty nice. The event recorder will get you to at least a set of events that make sense, at least in that part of the business logic. I'm not going to show you that because time is flying away. But what also helps is just look in the source code of Microsoft. Now, do know that the source code of Microsoft is available. If you have Docker container, it is available on the Docker container. If you have a DVD, it's available on DVD. So you are able to access the events quite easily. What I also use, actually, to be honest, since the beginning of this week, because that's when I noticed that it's actually working really, really well, is the AL Object Designer. This is an extension. I think this one, AL Object Designer, yeah. What you can do is actually just filter on events, even filter on subscriptions. So these are the subscriptions at this point, and even just the ones in my workspace. So I apparently do not use any subscriptions. I did create some subscriptions, and I actually did on my method code units. So it's actually very easy to get to events. So this on after post is probably somewhere here as well. I'm not going to search for it, but what you could do is basically just view the usage. You can see the code, you can browse the code, and so on. This is an interest. I'm not very familiar with it yet, but I'm going to look into that for sure because it gives you a very easy way to get to the AL source on a base application. So again, AL Object Designer, and then list an overview of the events in the Object Designer. Really nice. Is that an answer to your question, AJ?
Yeah, well, you know, I believe that the most of the time is spent on finding the correct event, as we have done it always. Explore the source code of Business Central, find the spot where you would do your modification if it was C-side and you modifying the base objects, and then find a correct event that is somewhere in the surroundings that would serve your the purpose. So that's the way how I work. And that event recorder, we have 2,500 events on just a simple order post. I mean, that doesn't help me.
Absolutely not. In a posting procedure, it doesn't help, but that in many other procedures and maybe just in custom procedures from other apps, it might still help, and it helps me in a lot of cases still. So, well, I give a few options here, and I hope that people will be triggered to find out some of these if not done yet. Let's continue. The obsolete tag property. Very simple. Basically just a new property that was introduced in not only version 16. I noticed that Microsoft also introduced it in cumulative update 15.4. But yeah, it's actually just a property that indicates some more information on the obsolescence of a certain something, in this case, a page. It gives you probably easier tracking on what version something will actually disappear. So any kind of obsolete, by the way, in this case it's obsolete tag 16. It's probably gone in version 18. Microsoft said no breaking changes for a year. This is actually warning you for a year that this breaking change will actually happen. So that is how Microsoft uses it to indicate what version it became obsolete. Yeah. Some remarks with this obsolete. Well, first of all, you can kind of like obsolete anything and now any object. There is some documentation about that. You can simply Google it, ping it. But what I actually found very interesting is also finding out in the app what obsolete fields there are. And we actually have been using that quite extensively as well. And just one tip is this, and I can't copy that. Sorry, I'm not going to copy it here. Okay, now I'm struggling here. I am copying now. Sorry for this. So let me go back to Business Central. Just a very simple thing. That's the fields table. It gives you an overview of all fields of the current apps installed, and gives you also an overview of, first of all, the caption and the field name, which is something that our consultants have been asking for, because all they see is like Dutch captions, and I don't want to have this English field names. But moreover, what you can do with this as well is give you a list of obsolete states. And it can give you basically just any field that is going to be obsolete. And you'll see it is quite an extensive list. Personally, I find this a very interesting list to look at, to see if anything that we are dependent on or something like that. Okay, if it helps you, good. If it doesn't, just don't look at it. Next, again, very simple, and I'm going to be very fast on this, an API for continuous delivery for Business Central via DevOps. You might think that I find DevOps really interesting. Yes, I find DevOps really interesting, and we are using that extensively. What I do not find really interesting is the fact that this is released because it's actually just for all the partners that are in the embed program, and that is like a small fraction of the partners out there at this moment. So this is not yet the most expected. How do I basically update my app on AppSource? No, this is actually just for the apps that are only published for embed partners. Yeah. So we're actually talking about the FAME framework. FAME stands for Fixed App Management Endpoint, and it's basically just an API. You see the endpoint here that allows you to upload apps to the FAME app repository, and that can be any kind of major, minor, hotfix, whatever. You can retrieve the list of all the customers that uses it, and then basically just schedule an automatic deployment. And that is all you need to be able to manage continuous delivery for all your customers, again, in the embed program. This is not a solution for all the apps on AppSource. Okay. For AppSource, there is still the partner center. That's kind of like a manual thing, a manual upload, and then it will go through validation from technical and marketing, and only then it's available for customers that have these apps installed. Okay. And then last for me, but not least, not last for me, I need to speed up, sorry about this, the read scale out. Now the read scale out is an ability on SQL Server, either Azure or not Azure. Now we can set up actually the NST to actually take this into account. So what is it? Basically to speed up read access. And anything that really reads a lot is something like reports, queries, API pages, these things like that, right? Now, to set this up, first of all, you need to enable the read scale out on the Business Central database. It's basically just setting up always on a SQL Server. Yeah, and in that case, you get like a failover situation. And the idea is, instead of reading in kind of like the write-sensitive database, it's going to read in the secondary database. Yeah, for all objects that is set up to be read in that secondary database. So you can, that's the second step, you can set up the data access intent property on reports and queries and pages of the type API. And then this is actually just an intent. What you can do is override that in the database access intent list. As you can see, this is a list that you can access in Business Central, but you can kind of like fine tune, okay, for this report, I would like to just read in my normal table, because any kind of read in a secondary database might cause a delay for that read as well. Depends a little bit on how intensive you are writing and all that. So only for reports, API pages, and queries. If there is a failover at that point, it will be redirected, so that is fine. And there can be a delay. If delay is not acceptable, you can use that page that I just talked about, the database access intent list, to override and just make it write on the primary database, read on the primary database.
Eric, a short question: is this both on-prem and SaaS, or only SaaS?
Well, what I could read from the documentation, that it's both on-prem and SaaS. It depends also on your SQL Server version. It needs to allow the read scale ability. But yeah, that's what I could read from the documentation. I was not able to set it up yet.
Having an eye on time?
Yep. I will rush through this, and then it's AJ's turn. So there are some new CodeCup rules. Unmistakably, you probably have set up or at least been anyway, have been reading about this. Now the rules you can access from the Microsoft Docs or in VS Code. There is again a VS Code extension from Andre, I think it is. That can help you to get to the rules. So I'm talking about this one, and he has got actually a list of code analyst rules. In any case, what I noticed is a few things. File names are now becoming important. I blogged about that, so I will not just lose too much time on that. The unused variables is now extended to parameters. So if you do not use any parameter, you get warnings as well. I think this is a really good one, and I've been spending quite some time to correct these in our application. Enums is now much stricter. For instance, in this case, I tried to assign enum number 1 to enum number 2, and these enums were different. In any case, if you want to allow that, there is a new property, assign compatibility, and then just hope that Microsoft's enum does also have that property set up. Variable for placeholders, yeah, this is actually already a necessary one. You should already have done that, but as you see, we didn't do that. You need to basically, in this case, say what this %1 stands for. So I have a dirty solution, kind of like a search replace, which basically puts this comment to do. Yeah, it is, as said, a dirty solution. I don't recommend just doing that. I just wanted to make sure that any next label that that any developer would implement would at least get the warning like, hey, you need to explain the percentages, the placeholders. How to tackle all these? Few steps: branch, disable all the failing rule sets. In that case, you do not have any errors anymore. Nice. Then you commit, and then you start to enable one rule set at a time and solve it. And that gives you a really nice focus on all the rules. Focus to fix all the rule sets. It's easier to fix one type of rule sets in batch than just going through all kind of different failures at that point. Just a small tip that I wanted to share with you. And by this, AJ, it's your turn.
I have switched my screen.
Yeah.
Pick it up.
All right, so that was an interesting 40 minutes, Waldo. Thank you. So let's continue with some not so interesting stuff, maybe. Or maybe it is interesting for some of you. Let's see. First thing that I want to talk about is the non-interactive printing in the cloud. And what I mean with that is we can now print documents directly without a user interaction. And that means that after the request page of the report has been displayed and the user clicks on print, he will not get the PDF preview or download or whatever in the browser, but instead you can grab the output of the report with a trigger, with an event, and you can send that output to anywhere you want. There is already an email printer extension available out of the box. That is, I will demonstrate it in a minute. And additional printing technologies will follow. Microsoft is working on creating some extra apps that you can use, and there are, of course, ISVs who will use this as well. By the way, Waldo, could you maybe mute yourself? Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem. So if you want to create your own solution, then there is a link here where Microsoft explains how to create your own solution that looks like this here. Here I see some code. There is an in the report management code unit, there is an on after document print ready event, and you get the object type. Does it come from a report or was it a page print? Which object ID, so what's the report ID or the page ID, information about the print, and the output of the print in a stream document, in a stream variable. So that is the PDF output. Now you can return a success variable, meaning that if you picked up the outputs, did send it somewhere, returning success will mean that you cancel any further processing of the print output. So the user will not see anything in the browser. The first thing you need to do in that code is, of course, to say, hey, was it already handled by somebody else? Then I exit. Otherwise, in this case, we check on object type report. That's what we want to handle. It can have a printer name in the object payload, which is the JSON object, by the way. And if that printer name is a certain printer that you have set up, or it's your printer, then you get some information about the object name, document type, and then you can handle it in any way you want. In this case, the example is to just email it, and then finally say success is true. How does that look like in real life? So we have an printer management page. There you already find the email printer. That is already a solution that can be used out of the box. And many printers today do have an email address that you can just send a PDF to, so it will print that one. So that is already something you can now use today. The setup, I've just set here printer email address being my demo email, and a subject. You want to add some body text, that's also fine. And I have set that one as my default printer, but of course you could also select it on specific reports. So you could set up multiple printers saying, hey, that report should go there and that report should go there. Now, if we try to print something, let me go to a sales order and then say print the confirmation. You'll see that here the selected printer is my email printer. Now, if I say print, then he will not show me anything, but instead here I have my email just coming in with the output of the print that was generated by Business Central. And this is available for on-prem as well, in the cloud, anywhere. So that is the solution to work with email printing. So the most important part is there is a new event on after document print ready with the document stream, which holds the PDF output. You can grab it and do whatever you want. Then the new property, well, we already had this property in one of the cumulative updates in version 15, but it's still, because it comes out in between 15 and 16, they put it as new on 16. So here it is, the application version. Instead of specifying dependencies, you use the application property in the app.json. That will download an app that propagates its dependencies, which is especially used for on-premise situations with a modified base app, and also for the mega app partners or embed app partners who are running their customized solution on this cloud platform. Extensions that are targeting both cloud and on-prem installations should consider to use this application property instead of using dependencies on the base app and the system application. And the reason for that is that if you run on-prem on a base app that has been modified, maybe it got a new ID, and mega app partners do have a new ID, then your extension will not be based on the correct base app ID, so it will not be able to install. So you need to get the ID of the base application. Now, instead of that, the partner who created that modified base app could create a small extension called the application extension that holds the correct ID of the base app. You don't have to know it. You only depend on the application app, and you will get automatically the base app, whatever ID it has. So you don't need to change the dependency when the ID of the base app has changed. How does that look like in the app.json? At the left-hand side, you see the dependencies as you get them by default when you create a new project. And the right-hand side, you see the has been removed the dependencies, and instead you get application with version 16. What happens when you download symbols? It downloads an app with the name application and a version that you have defined. And then you see that you get a new comment here: the following dependencies will be queried for propagated dependencies. And that comes from the application app that is downloaded. It propagates its dependencies, so you get those dependencies as well. How does that look like in that app? Imagine you have a base app or you create your own application app. Then in the base app, you set the normal dependencies, but you also set the property propagate dependencies to true. Now, in the app that normally would depend on the system application and base application, now you can set a dependency on that base app, or if the base app was called application, then you only set application. But let's say we have a base app and a dependent app. Then the dependent app only depends on that demo base app. And then see what happens in when you download symbols. It says, hey, I have downloaded my base app, and that propagated dependencies. So I will get the system application and the base application as well, meaning that you and your dependent app can use both system application and base application. So that is a new thing, and that really helps in targeting both on-prem and cloud environments. And yeah, I know modified base should not be done, but I also know some partners still do. You should not, but some do. Waldo, you know what I'm talking about. Okay.
No, but
then
I don't.
No, you don't, I know. Then we have another small feature, which is about combining variable declarations on one line. You see an example here on the left with 3 declarations of a variable of the same type. And on the right-hand side, you see the same thing, but now combined on one line. And of course, that can be done with any type. So it could also be with cust and customer to, or whatever type you want to declare multiple times. It will save some space, and it is also similar to .NET languages where this was already possible. I've also tried out if this the same would work in parameters, but there it doesn't work. So it's only for a variable declaration. So that is about combining variables. I cannot talk much longer about that. So the other topic, Business Central integration with the CDS, the Common Data Service. The idea is that there is a better way of sharing data across Dynamics 365 solutions. So Dynamics 365 for sales, customer engagement, etc. That means that you can synchronize data between Business Central and the Common Data Service database. I've read closely through the documentation, that link is here, but it all starts, and there it says that it has not been fully released at this moment. And I think that also the documentation has not been completely written, because out of the box it works for the standard entities and tables. It was quite hard to find out how to add custom entities, but in the end, the promise is that it will be possible to add your own custom tables to both Business Central and as a new entity to CDS, and then synchronize them. To set up the CDS synchronization, I have just a couple of slides here. You search for the setup Common Data Service connection in the assisted setup. From there, if you click on next, it will automatically find the URL of your Common Data Service environment. If that's not correct, you can change it here or click on the assist edit, which should give you a list if you have more than one connected to your account. Then you need to sign in with administrative credentials. If you click on that, you get you type in your admin credentials. It must be a user with both system administrator and solution customizer role in the CRM CDS environment. After that, the administrator is signed in. If you user does not have the correct roles, it will give you a pop-up, an error message saying, "Hey, I am missing this or this security role." Then, well, it's not as fast as this, but it takes a while before you get this page. But then you have to choose an ownership model. The recommended team model, but there is also a person model possible here. And this has to do with the setup of business units in CDS, which is quite complex out of box. So that really asks for another topic or another session where we could talk for more than an hour about it. So I just leave it here with the default settings. And then when you click on next, it also will automatically start the synchronization. And well, that's all. It's just a very simple wizard, and you end up with a Common Data Service page or page for accounts, for contacts, etc., where you can see all the data coming from CDS, and you can create them in Business Central. So you need to link those records to records in your contact table or in your customer table. So it's not only just getting those records. You need really to link those records one by one. There is a new table type available in AL, which is table type CDS. And that is, there is also CRM, by the way, but it's considered to be an external table that is not managed by Business Central. The idea is that you can register this table with a connection to CDS, so the data you store in here is directly synchronized, directly stored in CDS rather than in SQL Server. However, Microsoft says we do not recommend you to create a manual table type CDS. It is there if you want to, but the recommendation is to use the integration mapping instead. And integration mapping looks like this, with a list of out-of-the-box entities that you can connect to a table in CDS. You can set up the field mapping as well between those tables, and you will be able, of course, to add your own entities to this, but that is the part that is not documented at this moment and maybe not even released. I don't know that. We need to find out. A lot of events and many code is involved here. But the idea is, of course, that synchronization means that you have both a table in CDS and in Business Central, and these will be kept in sync instead of having a table that is not really a table in Business Central, but only a table in CDS. Of course, the idea behind this is that you can store data in a table in Business Central, which then, with the synchronization, ends up as new data in CDS, and then you can show that data in a Power App, in a CRM application, can use it in Flow, etc. And then with Flow or Power Apps, you can also store data into CDS, which then will be synced back into Business Central. So that is a way better integration than we had before. Then topic about performance of web services and reports is added to the application inside telemetry. Business Central, starting with version 16, emits telemetry for web service requests and report execution. You get information about the execution time and also timeouts of web service requests and reports. And this data can then be used with a dashboard in Azure Application Insights, where you can query it or view it on a dashboard. So you can monitor your environments and see, hey, do we have any problem here? How is our environment performing at this moment? And you can react to that even before customer starts complaining. It really requires some time to get used to this, especially that queries, the Custo query language. I'm sure on the events like directions would have been a lot of sessions around that, but there's also some sessions online, and there are some blog posts, and there's more information that will follow about that. I can really recommend you to dive into this and read more about this possibility. That's for my presentation. So that is, I rushed a little bit, but it's exactly in time. So are there any questions left?
You've done your best, Arend-Jan. And actually, yeah, we're at the hour. And meanwhile, Eric has there were a couple of questions on the question window, and he has already answered them. So I think we're going to end this one, unless somebody still has a question. Let's give a couple of you guys and girls the possibility to pose a question if you want to still, and otherwise we're perfect on time. I don't see anything coming up now, unless I'm looking wrong. No. So Eric, Waldo, sorry, and AJ, thank you very much, guys. You did a great job. Let's see how people are going to pick this up, and maybe some of the topics could be dived into in one of the next webinars. Let's see. Thank you very much, everybody who attended, and see you around next time.